Well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's great to be here. I want to especially thank Manuel ahead of time. This is not a paper. This is not research. My kind of mandate was to come and just like share some thoughts about how artificial intelligence is affecting media. And so what Manuel had was like some scratchy notes that I had made ahead of time. So you can decide if you want to listen to that. I would not want to be in the position necessarily of having to discuss it. So thank you to Manuel. So some thoughts on how AI is and maybe in the future affecting media, including things like misinformation. I guess one high-level distinction you could make in thinking about the impact on an industry, a lot of what we've been talking about is how it affects the production of different goods, i.e. like complementing, substituting for labor, and so on. And a separate question is how is it going to affect the way we consume media? So you could start on the supply side of this market and ask how is artificial intelligence potentially affecting the production of news, of content? And I think just the main thing I would say about that is I think this is a kind of canonical case where most of the content we're talking about, particularly journalism, but also other things like movies and so on, are the kind of production tasks that AI is not yet very good at and not going to be very good at anytime very soon. So we could spend more time thinking about it, but if you think through what goes into, say, investigative journalism, that is not well suited by the metrics that we've talked about. There are examples of AI being used in the production of news. So this is like Associated Press content, which is in fact produced by at least an automated algorithm. It's something like a company released an earnings report, and they've turned that earnings report into text in a very simple kind of mechanistic way. This is like a Washington Post story about a high school football game, which was written by a computer. So you can see how there are, in this world, there are some very tightly defined things that potentially you could imagine automating in this way, and we'll probably see more of that, but I would expect that whole impact to be pretty small.
I got paid $20 an article to write those things in high school.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, and there will be jobs displaced, there will be people who used to do things who don't do them anymore. I think in the big picture, that's going to be small. So what I want to focus on today is not the production side of this industry, but the demand side of this industry, and in particular, all of the ways in which this industry takes content and matches it to consumers. I think that's where most of the live issues are right now, and I think that's where most of the potential impact is going to be in the future. You could think of that as how do platforms, how does Facebook, how do news organizations, how does Netflix, how do movie production companies get content in front of consumers, how do consumers find content, and how could artificial intelligence potentially both help consumers find what they want to see, and also, importantly, and as will be kind of a theme, find what others want them to see. That could be what is actually good from a social point of view. It could be what some firm is trying to get in front of them. It could be what the North Korean government wants them to see, and so on. Okay? So I will talk about these things. So first, just a few thoughts on a kind of high-level framework for organizing, thinking about this, and then three kind of examples of where AI, I think, is impacting media. The first I'll call matching, the second I'll call bias, the third I'll call capture, and I'll tell you what those are. Okay? So this, just a few high-level framework thoughts. What's distinctive about this industry? The goods we're talking about, both in the news space and in entertainment media more broadly, are roughly speaking information goods. They have their heterogeneous tastes in the population of consumers, both cross-sectionally and over time. They're experienced goods, by and large. You don't know ahead of time whether you're going to like a movie or not. You have to see it. Sometimes even after you consume the goods, you still don't know their quality. That is, you read a news story, and even at the end of it, the quality is not fully revealed to you. For example, you don't know if it was true or false, and that's going to matter. And it's a space of very large goods with low marginal costs. All this stuff together means we end up in many of these spaces with huge bodies of content, consumers who might like some small subset of that a lot, and a lot of the other stuff not so much. And so a big part of the problem is how do we do this matching? And a lot of these markets are organized around trying to help consumers find the content that's going to be good for them. So what are the reasons why that might not work well, or why we might not just be sitting right now today at the first best? The first is a search problem, basically, which is that It's hard for consumers to search through all posts that were posted on Facebook today and find the ones that they want. It's hard for Google to search through the entire internet and show me the content that I want. So that search process could work imperfectly, and I can't find what would maximize my utility. Second, in some of the domains that we're talking about, there's a very different kind of problem, which is not a classic search problem, which is there may be a misalignment of incentives between what I want, or what I at least look like I want, and what would be good for society. That is, we're talking about kinds of content that have externalities associated with them. And so that relates to fake news, it relates to bias in general, it relates to sort of hard content versus trashy, not so hard content, violence in video games, and so on. And finally, there are third parties out there that might have other ideas and incentives to influence what we see. That can include governments, it can include firms, it can include others. Okay? So there's been all kinds of talk about, I think we all have a kind of working definition of our heads. Where is artificial intelligence going to be good? What kind of problems is it going to work well for? As many people have alluded to, it's going to work well, among other things, when we have a lot of data on prior cases we can learn from. We have a tightly specified decision problem, and I think especially important in this context where the objectives we're maximizing, the outcomes we care about, are easily, first of all, are well defined and are measurable in those iterations that we see. Okay. So problem number one, and these relate to those 3 points I gave. This is AI and matching. That is AI going to make us better at showing consumers what they want initially? So you could think of Netflix as the kind of canonical case for this. Netflix famously had something called the Netflix Challenge, which was like an early iteration of using AI to help recommend content to consumers. Netflix is like trying to figure out how to tell me what kind of movie I might enjoy. So we want to choose a Netflix recommendation. Hal wants to show me a search result. Facebook wants to put something in my newsfeed. And the goal of all of this is just to figure out which of those things is going to maximize my utility. Does that problem satisfy these conditions? You could think about that a little bit. I think, roughly speaking, out of the gate, the answer would be yes, it does. This is sort of almost a canonical case of where this is going to tend to work well. We have lots and lots of data on what movies people watched on Netflix or what they clicked on when they did Google searches. And at least as long as we are happy to define the objective, if my utility is well represented by what I click on, which movie I watch, what web page I spend time on, and so on, we have a lot of very tightly defined feedback on those objectives. So this is kind of a canonical, high-impact example of this in a lot of cases. And so a place where we would expect in the media space the problem of learning from a lot of past data what I like, what my preferences are, and using that to show me content that is personalized to me, and learning from past data about Catherine's preferences and using that to show content that is personalized to her is going to be like one of the leading examples of where this works well. So that seems pretty clear. Now, let me make an observation, which I think, although I think that is the right analysis broadly, there is something which I would suggest is kind of a puzzle in a way, which is, in fact, my description would be the extent of personalization and the success of personalization and things like personalized recommendations in many of these domains remains incredibly low. So Google search results today, somebody actually had to write a paper to kind of document this, but I think you could just ask somebody who works at Google and they'd tell you the same thing. Google search results are not personalized, essentially at all. There's some big exceptions, like location is a really important source of personalization. If I search for pizza, you don't want to show me a pizza place in Florida. But essentially, if I type in search results, or Hal types in search results, we see exactly the same thing. That's true of search for products on Amazon. If I search for something on Amazon, you search for something on Amazon, you're going to see essentially the same thing. That what I see when I go to the New York Times, what I see when I go to CNN, is exactly the same as what you're going to see on the front page, with very few exceptions. Separately from search, you think about recommendations. Online personalized recommendations remain terrible. This is what Amazon, this is like today, if I go to Amazon, this is what Amazon recommends that I buy. And these are 3 sets of things that I recently bought. So the best they can do is say, hey, you bought an electric toothbrush. Want to buy another one? This is state-of-the-art personalized. They were clever enough to know, we bought like the first 5 Harry Potter books. And so they're clever enough to recommend Harry Potter book number 6 as something that we might want to buy. But, and you've seen this, on these pages. The personalized recommendations used to be at the top of the Amazon page when you went to Amazon. And they're now like way down at the bottom. They're terrible, nobody uses them. The same thing is true for Netflix, like personalized recommendations on, this is my current personalized recommendation on Netflix. 4 out of 5 of these things are television series that I have watched some but not all episodes of. So like, that's a good idea of something to recommend me, but it's not exactly like cutting edge AI. Facebook you might think of as the kind of canonical exception to this, and it is to some extent. Facebook is very targeted. We would say there's some research related to this, but I think the reality on Facebook is most of the newsfeed algorithm is a combination of 2 things. One, what is getting shared by my friends, and trying to figure out which of my friends I care about. So it's kind of ranking friends, and then kind of vertically ranking content. So to figure out overall what content do people like or not like. Even on Facebook, there's relatively little. So this is, maybe people have pointed this out and talked about it. I haven't read much about it. I just give it the name, the personalization paradox. In practice, this doesn't work very well. There's remarkably little, and where it's tried, quality is poor. Let me just offer one possible hypothesis. I just thought about this for this talk, so I don't really have any evidence for this, but one thought of what might be going on. Consider 3 things that an algorithm might be trying to do, that Google might be trying to do with search results, that Amazon might be trying to do with search results. Task number 1, figure out the average utility of products. Figure out which movies overall do people like or not like. Task number 2, figure out relative to myself today and myself tomorrow and myself the next day, what am I right now currently trying to do? And third, learn about me and learn about my average kind of taste. So if you think about some space of utility, like relative utility for goods that varies across people, across time, you could try to learn about the kind of average level in that space. You could try to learn about the stable between-person variation in that taste, or you could try to learn about the within-person over time variation. And just imagine measuring that and asking which of those dimensions is bigger. Conjecture, this one is actually pretty small compared to these ones. And so actually a lot of the value is in getting 1 and 2 right. So if you met, like, just to make this concrete, like suppose I'm Amazon, I have to rank these are products on Amazon. I have to decide like which of these to show you. Task number 1 would be like figuring out that people like Nike shoes better than these are $5 shoes. That those are better shoes than these, or that if somebody types machine learning or artificial intelligence, this like best-selling popular book is going to be they're going to be more likely to want to read it than that great Springer Yellow book on artificial intelligence for fashion industry in the big data era. Task number 2 is, today I'm looking for some shoes, tomorrow I'm looking for a toothbrush. Which of myselves am I? And task number 3 is learning actually I'm somebody who, on average likes baseball more or likes baseball less. So I think you could think about those as, if you think about that over time one, so how do you learn which of myself is really a communication problem. It's a problem about parsing queries and being able to interpret what I'm telling you. And so one of the tasks you can think of as AI is currently performing in search, on Facebook, in Amazon, is trying to better interpret the interactions with consumers and allowing consumers to say what they're looking for. This is just like a bit of data from an old paper, but if you just take news websites and measure the mean utility of that website to a conservative and the mean utility of that website to a liberal based on just consumption data, you might have expected that to be like a negatively sloping relationship where the stable individual heterogeneity is the dominant thing. But what it actually is a very strongly upward sloping relationship. So all the difference we're worked up about Fox News versus New York Times in this consumption data is like that variation around the 45-degree line. But the variation between there's some websites that people really like and others that they don't is much bigger. So that's thoughts on matching. Thoughts now on bias. So you could think of Facebook as the kind of canonical case here. This problem is to choose not what consumers want, but rather what is good for society. So how can we choose more accurate, more informative, more socially valuable content rather than what either consumers want or at least what consumers look like they want based on their short-run consumption behavior. So why does that problem exist? Why might those things ever diverge? This is, of course, a subject of a long literature, going back to Becker, Downs, and others, pointing out that there are externalities to information, particularly political information, through its effect on democracy, but externalities of other kinds of information as well. And those things are going to cause a potentially very big wedge between what people want themselves and what would be good for them to consume from a social perspective. Also, importantly, I think there may be behavioral aspects that mean even what I click on in a short-run sense, the signals that Facebook measures easily may not even capture my long-run utility very well. So you could imagine something like, is trashy, partisan content something like a temptation good that I might be actually consuming of more of than I really should from my perspective. So to say this is not a new problem, so this is Thomas Jefferson saying you can't believe anything you see in a newspaper, it's full of misinformation and false claims. That's been true for a long time. But it's obviously come to the fore, particularly, I mean, this is a broad topic of bias, but the specific part of this, which is about false content, has obviously come to the fore in post-election with Facebook and so on. So could ask, how well suited is this problem for machine learning? How well are those conditions satisfied? And I think we would, my quick conclusion would be this is sort of the opposite. This is a case where it's very, very hard. These outcomes, both the externalities and what is true and false, are not easily measurable in the data. They're extremely hard to measure in the data. And on top of that, we don't agree about the answer. So different people's views of what is socially beneficial and not differ, which makes it especially hard to get this right. Now, one subtlety here, and this kind of goes back to the literature that I want to emphasize, I think there are two cases which are very different from the perspective of how this technology will work. And there's a kind of parallel here to the literature on when is competition going to be good or bad in media markets. I think there's something very similar here in asking when is AI going to be good or bad for media markets. There are two. I think it's very clear that consumers' behavior is not perfectly aligned with social objectives, but we could imagine two versions of that. One, ultimately, in this truth-falsehood space, ultimately people want to learn the truth. People care about having accurate information. They might not care enough, but they prefer true information to false information. But figuring out who you can trust to tell you that is a really hard problem. And we have a lot of models, rational mechanisms, non-rational mechanisms, that will explain why people end up having very divergent views about who they could trust. But ultimately, what they want is to know the truth. The second is, actually, they don't care about the truth. They just want to be told that they're right. They just want to be entertained, and so on. These differ a lot in the sense that if you imagine what would happen if it was revealed to me that some content was false or that some news outlet was making stuff up, in case number one, that news outlet would still pay a penalty. In case number two, they would not. And ultimately, I think in the kind of AI context, in this first world, there's the potential for the information that consumers reveal to still give us what we want. So conjecture that the positive impact of AI is likely bigger in World I than in World II. Let me just give you quickly a couple of recent, this is like a paper that is not even posted yet, but just a couple of facts on, is this working well on Facebook so far or not? Are we succeeding using these methods in filtering out misinformation? This paper has a sample of 570 sites that past work has identified as sources of misinformation. We're going to measure their engagements on Facebook and shares from those sites on Twitter. And then we're going to construct a set of other news sites, small news sites, big news sites like the New York Times, business and culture sites, sports sites as comparison groups. And so we just wanted to get a sense, given there has basically been a huge amount of effort devoted, or at least Facebook would claim has been devoted to trying to, and others, address the spread of this kind of content. We have almost no data points so far on whether it's working. So here's, with a ton of caveats, one kind of rough look at what's happening. So here is shares from all of those sites on Facebook. You can see that they went up to a peak around the election and have since fallen by about half since then. That might be a positive message. Indeed, the stuff that Facebook has been doing since about 2017 is working. Could reflect lots of other things. It could be that political interest has gone up and down. It could be that a lot of these sites are producing less content. It could be that this sample of sites is weighted towards sites early on. As a comparison group, here is the same things on Twitter, where you don't see that sharp downward trend. So if you look at the ratio of those two, you see was roughly flat up to the election and then has fallen since. We think of that as suggestive, consistent with the view that some of what Facebook is doing might be working. If you look at this ratio alongside other categories of sites, maybe that's been true for all of them. You don't see it for any of these others. So it's really specific to these fake news sites that circulation on Facebook relative to other sites seems to have fallen. That I think we could think of as good news. There are a lot of caveats associated with it. I think it's consistent with what they're doing working. However, the absolute level remains high. And the most effective strategies, if you look at what they're doing, they're not mostly about AI. They're things like hand coding, giving consumers more information, filtering out sources that are known to be low quality. So I'm out of time. Let me just say, I just had a few slides on this last part. I think it's just worth, all I was going to say is just to flag, it's easy to think of artificial intelligence in this domain as a tool for good. It's very important to also remember that it can be used as a tool by actors who are maybe not trying to do such good from our perspective. So in particular, in countries like Russia and China, where the government is interested in censoring content, in tracking what people are doing, in getting them to see propaganda rather than content that might be more accurate, these same tools can be very effective for those governments. And that's an important caveat to all of this. Thanks.
So essentially what I realized as I went along is that actually this topic, and I'm not talking about media and AI, but rather about AI and fake news, is really a very important topic. And the more I thought about it, the more I got serious about it and also a bit concerned. I mean, essentially, you see, when you start to think of it, we live in the knowledge economy, or the information society, whatever. And that construct is predicated on the assumption that there is such a thing as true knowledge or true information, and that we can find out what's true and what's not, and that if you do find out, that will lead to desirable actions. That's kind of, we never spell it out because it's so implicit in what we do and what we don't. And indeed, that the function of that society and economy requires us to tell apart true from false or fake. Now, fake news, in the broader sense, and I will try to define that, really have a very pernicious effect because they undermine trust and then undermine social capital. And social capital is a construct that we use more and more in economics, in growth, and so forth. We know how important that is, or we know more how important that is, and also trust. And it really, it can undermine democracy. We have seen that. It can undermine other institutions as well. So we shouldn't take it lightly as just a ephemeral phenomenon associated with certain elections and so forth. This is serious stuff. Now, what's the relation to AI? Well, AI is, as we have seen, it's a very powerful technology that has to do with the sequence data to information, to knowledge, to decision-making, to actions. So this is highly consequential. And again, the threat is that this F for false or F for fake, okay, it can really affect the sequence in many ways, in the sort of data, fake data if you wish, in the information, the way you interpret the data, the knowledge, and lead to wrong actions. So this is serious stuff. And really, the more I thought about it, the more I realized that. So what do we mean by fake news? Well, there are two sides to the fake news. One is that they are untrue. Okay, so it's hard to tell, that's true, okay, that whether something is true or not, what's the criteria and so forth. But the moment we say F, we mean not T, right? Not true, okay? And the second one is that when we talk about fake news, we are not referring to some exogenous helicopter-like fake news, but somebody, some entity, has contrived to sell us, to throw at us this fake news. So there is intent, there are costs in producing them, and so if there is that entity, we can analyze behavior, we can analyze the incentives, the motives, and so forth. And notice that the originator presumably knows that this is fake, because otherwise why bother, okay, with that, diffusing fake news. And the problem is that fabricated fake news typically is much, much cheaper than that proving them false, right? And this is a continuing motive when you talk about these things. Now, there is a long history. This is for fun. A long history of fake news. The first one I could think of is the story of Moses, sending the 12 spies to the Holy Land, to the Promised Land. Hey, come back and tell us what you saw. And they come back, 10 of them, with fake news, okay? And, the people of Israel believe that, and so they get punished, 40 years in the desert until the whole generation is wiped out, okay? So fake news can be highly consequential. And of course, superstition, also highly consequential. In the Middle Ages, there is a wonderful paper by Oster in the JEP about witchcraft and so forth, the Salem's trial and so forth. These are fake news, but essentially, we need what I call arbiters of truth in many, many different contexts where you have asymmetric information or you need verification standards and so forth, okay? So we have the FDA. The FDA was a tremendous improvement in our lives, okay? And, but, nevertheless, there are people that don't buy into that, and now there is this movement against vaccination, okay? Peer reviewing science, that's also a method for telling truth, if you wish, okay, for arbiters of truth. But, there is skepticism about climate change, about the role of experts, research on diet. Don't read that anymore. Now alcohol is bad for you. Give me a break, okay? In the financial realm, for sure, but that didn't prevent 2008. And there are lots of testing and inspection and certification institutions as well. So we need those institutions, okay? The interesting point is that there are no such institutions in the context of in the realm of public and political discourse. I mean, we haven't invented those institutions. And, the truth doesn't prevail necessarily in the long run. And when you have a fake news or whatever in the short run, they may have fateful consequences like we have seen in 2016. So the media is supposed to be one of perhaps the main watchdog in that respect, but there is very weak self-regulation. The New York Times is an exception, and it has shrinking, essentially, exposure. We thought that the universal education and the wide availability of knowledge will really play a big role. Don't hold your breath on that, okay? And there have been plenty of arbiters of truth in history. You know, the oracle in ancient Greece, the prophets, the elders, the church, the learned man, the Encyclopedia Britannica, now it's Wikipedia, the experts, and so forth. Okay, so what about AI? Well, I think, and this is, I take issue with you, Matthew, on this one. I think that AI can play a big role here, okay? Now, you said that it's focused on the demand side, true, but on the other hand, there is a lot of action in the supply side. And in fact, you mentioned, it's not a paper, it's a publication that says that AI is fundamentally changing both audience behavior and the creative process itself, not necessarily in journalism, but in other areas as well. Now, the point is this. I think that AI can bring down the costs of establishing what's true and what's false. Now, this is not an easy task, but I think that AI is suitable for that purpose, and I think that we have to think very creatively about how to do that. So we need verification, or if you wish, truth-sifting algorithms, okay, to do that in different contexts. Some will be generic, some will be more specific. And the interesting question, and you alluded to that, Matt, is does the market provide incentive to do that? Okay. So far, it doesn't seem so. I mean, Facebook and so forth, they have been very reluctant to play that role, okay, and they have done some of that because of public pressure. So imagine that a social media platform were to offer a true or false signal of this sort, okay? So to any posting, okay, there will be, in real time, you will see, okay, that, okay, true, maybe true, can't tell, etc. Okay? So the question is, would you be willing to pay for it? Okay, to have that, okay? Would competition push others to do the same? Moreover, could this be truly decentralized in the sense that would you trust a for-profit firm or whatever to be arbiters of truth in that context? Will algorithms have to be transparent? Because otherwise, you know, what do you know what they're telling you? I think that these are very important research questions that we should put our minds into it. Now, okay, I will keep on this and concluding remarks. So, and this relates to what Susan was saying earlier, okay? I think that AI is a powerful tool that not only for just economics as we conceive it, but for the functioning of democracy, for fairness, social trust, etc. And I think that key to them is, again, the use of AI to sort out truth from fake. Okay, so, and if I may, I want to say also in the spirit of what Susan was saying, we tend to be what I call passive, to do passive research or to be enlightened bystanders to what these technologies are doing or may do to us. And I think we should be much more proactive in pushing for AI-based methods to really address the big problems of society. And AI, you know, as a GPT, of course, has this dual potential to do good and to do harm. We should be very, very mindful on that. And, you know, there was, Matthew, you mentioned China. I will say just, and we conclude with that. I recently learned more about the social credit system in China that so far has only 200 million people under it. Alibaba is actually doing it. It already has consequences, and in 2 years, I think, they're supposed to extend it to the entire Chinese population. To it. Thank you very much.